The breakup felt right at first, like finally catching my breath after being underwater for too long. You know those memes about husbands being like another kid? That's how it felt. A break. I grinned, half joking, to John. His face fell. That familiar puppy dog pout. You're serious? He said, the word hanging between us. That should have been my sign, the flicker of worry in his voice. But I brushed it off, told him to relax and enjoy the peace and quiet. He pretended to laugh it off, but I knew I'd hurt him. Night one was incredible, dinner with the girls, drinks that went down way too smooth, zero complaints about me getting home late. I fell asleep with a giddy buzz I hadn't felt since college. This was going to be fun. Cut to a few weeks in, and that buzz turned into a nagging hum. My apartment felt emptier, my nights too long. Turns out, being able to do whatever I wanted wasn't as great as I thought. I missed John. Not the nagging part of him, but the warm, cozy feeling of someone always having my back, the way he'd leave a goofy note and a half-eaten breakfast sandwich on the counter for me. Mark from the gym sensed it, I guess. He upped the charm, invited me to his fancy workout class, then out for smoothies. When he offered to actually cook dinner one night, something inside me snapped. This guy, smelling of expensive cologne and protein powder, was way more than I bargained for on this little break. Mark slowed down, I warned him, and he did his whole hurt feelings routine. And then he did the thing I absolutely wasn't expecting, he kissed me. Right there on his modern, uncomfortable couch. In that moment, John's face flashed in my mind, the real John, not the caricature I'd been painting for myself. The guilt hit like a ton of bricks. Oh, God, this is bad, I stammered, pushing him away. He laughed, that bad, huh? But I wasn't playing along anymore. Back home that night, I tried to shake the feeling of betrayal. Stupidly, I texted John a hi, just to see. He messaged back within seconds, like he'd been waiting by his phone. My heart did a weird flutter. Miss you, he wrote, with a stupid heart emoji of all things. That was it, the turning point, the moment I realized this break was heading down a dangerous path. It wasn't just about Mark or the guilt, it was realizing that John didn't deserve this version of me. The next morning my phone blew up. It was my brother, but not his usual jokey texts. We need to talk, was all it said, followed by the dreaded coffee shop emoji. This was serious. He slumped on my couch, hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes I'd never noticed before. She's seeing someone, he blurted out, voice cracking. John's wife. Your whole freaking break thing went sideways for her too. The words barely registered, shock froze me. Mark, he continued, the name sounding sour in his mouth. That gym trainer dude, that's who she's with. I wanted to scream, to blame my brother for John's pain, for this mess I'd started. News of the fling spread like wildfire. My best friend, bless her, came over with a bottle of wine and a worried look on her face. She tried to play it cool, offering up advice in that careful tone you use around a wounded animal. Look, if this break isn't what you thought, maybe, she trailed off. But that night, in bed, Mark's texts pinged one after another. Forget them, he wrote, smooth as ever. Tonight, we make your break worthwhile. He was relentless, promising nights out, fancy dinners, anything to distract me from the pit in my stomach. And for a while, it worked. We went to trendy bars, the kind I only ever saw on TV, and he knew all the right people to charm. I tried to play along, with a part of the carefree woman having the time of her life. But every time the laughter died down, John's face would swim into focus. At home, things felt different. John didn't mention Mark, but he didn't need to. The apartment pulsed with unspoken questions. He started leaving me little things, my favorite cookies, a new book he knew I'd love. It felt like a silent apology, one I wasn't sure I deserved. Mark was the opposite, he was all fire and intensity. One moment, he'd tell me I was the only thing that mattered, and the next he'd pick a fight, accusing me of playing games. You can't go back, you know, he'd hiss when I tried to pull away. Even as his touch began to feel like sandpaper, I'd cave, craving the excitement that drowned out the guilt. That's how I found myself in situations I never imagined. A hotel room with Mark after a whirlwind weekend getaway, the smell of chlorine and his expensive cologne making me sick. I couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore. This was meant to be fun, a break. But instead, it was a trap, and I was the one who'd sprung it. The guilt was eating me from the inside out. I'd skip dinners with my parents, making up excuses, terrified of running into John while I was dressed up and clinging to Mark's arm. Then, at their anniversary party, there he was. Looking better than ever. Beside him stood a woman. Calm, elegant, and the furthest thing from me in her simple dress and understated jewelry. It was like looking at an alternate universe where I didn't make a colossal mess. Mark squeezed my hand, probably assuming possessiveness would fix the situation. It didn't. The whole evening was a blur. My mom, always so warm, gave me a strained smile that sent shivers down my spine. Dad, usually overflowing with bad jokes, barely said a word. Mark, thankfully, kept the attention on himself with his charm and stories I could barely listen to. On the way home, the silence in the car was crushing. Mark tried to joke, "Well, your parents don't seem to be my biggest fans." An understatement of the century. "Mark, this isn't working," I finally blurted out. It was weak, pathetic, but I couldn't string together a proper sentence. "Don't get dramatic," he smirked, but there was a tightness in his jaw that betrayed his cool act. "One bad night and you're folding already? I can't do this anymore." The words felt leaden. He laughed, that sharp, ugly laugh. "You're kidding, right? This is when it gets good," he said, a dangerous edge in his voice. "Besides, think your precious Johnny boy is sitting at home pining for you?" The next few days were a blur of awkward calls to my best friend, tearful apologies, and half-hearted attempts to get Mark to leave me alone. He'd switched from Prince Charming to full-on stalker mode, texts, calls, showing up at my work. Then, the real kick in the teeth. My mom's sister, the nosiest person in our whole family, called. "Word's getting around about you and that Jim guy, honey." And poor John. Well, he's not taking it well. Gossip travels fast in a small town, but hearing it from my aunt made it sickeningly real. Her voice wasn't angry, just disappointed. Like I was a child who'd broken a favorite vase, not a grown woman who'd shattered her life. That night, I finally worked up the courage. "John," I typed, then deleted. "We need to talk," I settled for, and hit send before I could lose my nerve. The wait for his reply was agonizing. John's response came in less than a minute. "Meet me at the cafe." He didn't add the usual, "the one where we first met," or any attempt at a sweet memory. Just cold, precise directions. Walking there felt like a death march. Each step brought back the good times, the way John's eyes crinkled as he laughed, the silly way he always ordered 2 cappuccinos because he'd inevitably spill half of the first one. Now those memories were tainted, overlaid with Mark's cologne and the image of that woman at the anniversary, her serene smile mocking my entire existence. John was already at a corner table, looking different. Not just the better haircut and the touch of gray at his temples, but something in his eyes. A hardness I'd never seen before. "You wanted to talk?" His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. The words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry about everything. Mark, the whole break thing was a huge mistake. I want to fix this, if we still can." John held up his hand, stopping my pathetic apology dead in its tracks. "I'm actually here to discuss practical things. The apartment, splitting up our accounts, all that." "Practical?" I choked on the word. "But John, I was stupid." "You were selfish," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I waited, thinking you'd come to your senses. Turns out, I was the stupid one." He tossed a folder on the table. "My lawyer drafted a preliminary separation agreement. It's pretty standard, of course, if you want to contest." The cafe whirled around me. John, hiring a lawyer, while I was flitting around with Mark? Everything had turned upside down. "Wait," I sputtered, "your lawyer? There's a euro someone else?" He finally looked me straight in the eye. No sadness, no anger, just that cold resolve that terrified me. Yes, he confirmed, there is. He stood up, pushing in his chair with meticulous precision, the picture of a man with a plan. Look it over when you have a clear head. Let me know if you have any changes, otherwise, sign and we can both move on. And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of coffee and betrayal. The separation agreement sat on my kitchen table for 3 whole days. I reread each clause until the words blurred. Standard, splitting assets, blah blah blah. My life was being divided as neatly as a pie chart. Except there was nothing neat about the raging storm in my chest. My best friend, bless her, finally stormed over. I can't take it anymore. You're moping around, letting Mark manipulate you, and meanwhile, John's probably off on honeymoon with Miss Perfect. He's not, I mumbled, finally looking up, just being smart and moving on. And you? She grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning them. Signing this is like giving up without a fight. That night, I dreamt of John and his mystery woman in absurd, vivid scenarios. Riding a tandem bike, matching sweaters, singing karaoke, each image seared into my brain. Waking up felt like plunging into icy water. I couldn't take it anymore. Mark, sensing my weakness like a wolf circling an injured deer, doubled down. Fancy dinners, gifts left on my doorstep, the full cliché playbook. And, pathetically, it sort of worked. For a night, the expensive bubbly and his practiced charm drowned out the guilt. But the mornings? Those were brutal. John's random texts about bills or insurance felt like little stings. The fact that he was barely fazed by our marriage crumbling drove my desperation to a whole new level. Mark was the embodiment of everything John wasn't. Impulsive, loud, living life on a constant adrenaline high. I hated that I craved that rush, that I started dressing differently, talking louder, just to fit his world. The old me felt like a dusty costume I'd thrown in the attic. And yet, one evening after a particularly outrageous party Mark threw at his penthouse, champagne and half-naked models were apparently involved. I stumbled back to my quiet apartment, and the loneliness hit like a physical blow. What on earth was I doing? My phone lit up, John, but not about bills. Are you okay? It read, simple, yet it shattered the facade of control I was frantically trying to build. With trembling fingers, I typed back, "Can we talk?" His response was immediate, "Tomorrow." Just like that, I'd thrown a wrench into his perfectly organized plans. A bitter thrill of satisfaction ran through me. Maybe I wasn't completely done fighting after all. Meaning John was like stepping into a boxing ring after a decade of avoiding exercise. We picked a neutral cafe, neither of our old haunts. He looked even more different, not just fit, but a sharp edge to him that scared and yet intrigued me. So, I started, stupidest word ever, this whole lawyer thing. Seems a bit much, no? He didn't even blink. After everything, we need a clean break. Makes it easier for everyone. Easier for you, maybe. I snapped back, then hated myself for sounding whiny. That's when it started, not a shouting match, but John laying out the facts, his voice calm and lawyerly. My impulsive break, by sneaking around with Mark. The nights John spent waiting up, the lies, the whole pathetic spectacle. With every word, it wasn't John the first pictured, but my dad. The way his face would change when I disappointed him, that coldness behind his eyes. And that hurt more than any yelling could have. Mark has a temper, I said weakly, the whole thing got messy. John cut me off. He threatened me, threatened my family. This, with the lawyers, this is about protection. For you too. Protection? I almost choked on the word. Then it hit me. John's brother, the loose cannon, had probably blabbed everything. My stomach churned. How much did John actually know? The waitress interrupted us, placing the bill in its neat little tray. I reached for it on instinct, but John's hand stopped me. Let me, he said. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple act of taking charge. Another reminder of the capable man I tossed aside. Before I could protest, he placed a few crisp bills down. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something. Was it pity? He stood, not offering a goodbye hug or any pretense of civility, just a curt nod. "The lawyers will be in touch," he said, and walked out. Alone, surrounded by the buzz of couples enjoying their lattes, I crumpled. It wasn't Mark's temper I was afraid of anymore. It was the finality in John's eyes. I'd messed up, royally, and now, just maybe, it was too late to fix. Mark wasn't going down quietly. Like a wounded animal, he turned vicious. My phone lit up with his texts, each one meaner than the last. Psycho, gold digger, even veiled threats about a knowing things. Then the rumors started, not just gossip, but nasty stuff planted online, whispered at work, questions about my mental state, made up stories about past flings, anything to chip away at my reputation. Mark was trash, but he was smart, weaving just enough truth into his lies. The worst part? My parents. They didn't confront me directly, too polite for that. Instead, it was the sad phone calls, checking in, just to see how I was doing, in that overly concerned voice that screamed disappointment. One afternoon, I broke down sobbing at my mom's kitchen table, all the righteous anger gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She stroked my hair, murmuring comforting platitudes, the same ones she used when I fell off my bike as a kid. But this? This was a wound no bandage could fix. Out of nowhere, a name flashed in my mind, Mrs. Peterson. My old high school English teacher, strict as hell, but with a surprising streak of compassion beneath her iron lady exterior. On a whim, I messaged her. Her response came back hours later, not comforting, but blunt: "Come to my office tomorrow." Mrs. Peterson's office was exactly the same, stacks of books, the smell of old paper, and a framed quote behind her desk. The hero's journey isn't a straight line, but a circle. I hadn't thought of that quote in years. "You made your choices," she said flatly, not even offering me tea, "now live with the consequences." But here's the thing about circles, you don't end up where you started. Learn from this mess. Her words stung, but it was the kick in the pants I needed. I spent the night drafting replies to Mark's texts. Scorching, but not crazy. My best friend served as the voice of reason on that one, and gathering evidence. Screenshots, old emails, anything to prove his smear campaign. The next morning, armed with coffee and a newfound resolve, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went straight to a lawyer's office. Not John's lawyer, a different one. A woman with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense haircut that signaled she was on my side before I even uttered a word. Turns out, weaponizing a breakup takes a special kind of lowlife, but it's also legally actionable. A cease and desist letter, the threat of exposing Mark's lies. It wouldn't erase the damage, but it might muzzle him for good. I signed those legal papers, a weird mix of satisfaction and shame coursing through me. This was the new low in my spectacularly bad decisions. The cease and desist did its job. Mark backed off, the text stopped, the rumors faded just as quickly as they appeared. But the relief I expected never came. Instead, a kind of grayness settled over me. I was winning the legal battles, but the war inside my head felt far from over. Therapy, even saying the word felt foreign. My best friend dragged me to that first appointment, practically bundling me into the overly beige office. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, started with simple questions. Sleep patterns, appetite, normal stuff. Then she asked, "When you think about what happened with Mark, how do you feel?" And that's when I crumbled. Not graceful sobbing, but ugly, snotty tears, the kind you don't even try to hide. Words tumbled out. The excitement of the break, the guilt, the thrill of Mark, my loneliness, the crushing weight of disappointment. It wasn't pretty. But as I rambled on, the therapist did something unexpected. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. "You didn't just make a mistake," she said, "you made a series of choices. That doesn't make you a bad person, but you can't pretend they didn't have consequences." That honesty was like a slap, but a needed one. Mark wasn't the sole villain here. I had willingly hurt the people closest to me, all for a cheap thrill. Each therapy session was like peeling layers off an onion, revealing uncomfortable truths I'd rather have kept hidden. And then the bombshell, a job offer. A friend of a friend thing, in a city 3 states away. Not glamorous, but a chance to disappear, start fresh. My immediate response was, hell yes. It seemed like the perfect escape. Telling John wasn't the dramatic showdown I'd expected. He seemed resigned. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, then vanished behind a wall of politeness. It was the final confirmation that whatever we had was over. My goodbye party was a blur. Friends wishing me well, forced smiles, too much wine. Late in the night, my best friend, tipsy and teary-eyed, grabbed my arm. I have to tell you something, she slurred. I'm the one who told John about you and Mark, right at the beginning. I thought I was doing the right thing. Betrayal, but of a different kind. Yet, I understood, twisted loyalty, just like I'd felt loyalty to Mark in those messed up early weeks. Anger bubbled up, then fizzled out. What was the point? Moving day was a somber affair. My brother showed up, not to talk about my terrible decisions, but to help load the truck. We worked in silence, a quiet understanding between us. As I pulled away, he tossed a brown paper bag onto the passenger seat. Sub sandwich, he said, a hint of a smile in his voice, in case you get hungry on your journey to become a better human. Then, with an awkward hug, he turned and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the start of something, maybe.